Ancient Greek philosophy is the cosmic projection of money. Projection is a psychological term which refers to the unconscious attribution of one's own mental state to another person. I might feel insecure about something, and as a defense mechanism, my mind projects that insecurity onto someone else. So in the popular consciousness, projection is when one person projects their mental state onto another person. The idea of cosmic projection generalizes the idea of projection. It says that groups of people can project, and they can project not only onto other people, but onto things, and even onto the cosmos itself. For example, cosmic projection is considered to be the main mechanism which generates pre-classical thought. In the case of animism, which is the ontology of the earliest human societies, natural events are attributed emotions and intentions. For example, rain is described as the clouds weeping. If a tree falls over, it's because it's tired. And if things move, it's not because of some impersonal force like gravity, it's because they want to move. In the case of astrology, human destiny is projected onto the stars. But mental states are not the only things which ancient cosmologies project onto the world. They gender the earth and sky. They project kinship structures onto the moon and the sun so that they're mother and father, or lovers. They imagine the structure of nature itself in the form of a monarchy. Or in some cases, they imagine the whole universe in terms of debt. Jupiter, reckoning that he owed no debt to Saturn, would dispose him of his sphere. The moon would remain dark and bloody. Why should the sun share his light with her? He is under no obligation. In summary, the natural world is described entirely in terms of the human world, something which modern philosophy and science tries to avoid. As poetic as this is, it isn't scientific. Falling things have no desires, and the moon feels no obligation. For this reason, intellectual history generally presents pre-classical thought as mythical poetry. It is only with the ancient Greeks that scholars see the first signs of science and philosophy. The Greeks were the first thinkers to provide scientific and naturalistic explanations of reality. That is, they sought to explain the world not through personal deities, but through impersonal laws of nature. As there was nothing personal about their explanations, it appeared as though they had overcome the naive self-projections of ancient cosmology. But how? Given the findings of our previous video, the idea that one could simply overcome cosmic projection seems absurd. As far as I could prove in the last video, it's the only mechanism by which we can come to understand the world. So, is unconscious cosmic projection really a relic of myth? Or have we continued our tradition of cosmic projection unconsciously? I'm going to present the classicist Richard Seaford's argument that ancient Greek philosophy and ancient Indian philosophy owes its existence to the invention of money. Or more specifically, money made an impression on the Greek psyche, which they then projected out onto the universe and called philosophy. Let's begin with a definition of philosophy. Part 1. What is philosophy? Seaford limits himself to a definition of metaphysics, and I will address philosophy more generally in future videos. He defines metaphysical thought as the counterintuitive idea of a single substance, which could be a law of nature, underlying the plurality of things manifest to the senses. Inasmuch as this latter idea implies concern with reality as opposed to appearance, with what is fundamental as opposed to what is derivative, and with comprehensive, universal as opposed to partial understanding, it is metaphysical. So, humans begin thinking on a metaphysical level when they start positing invisible, universal, and impersonal things, such as laws of nature or fundamental substances. All ways of thinking which were entirely unintuitive to earlier humans. Part 2. Where did the Greeks believe their philosophy came from? Metaphysical thought was not only unintuitive for the earliest humans, it arrived so suddenly that even the first philosophers had very little idea of where their intuitions came from. In fact, neither Parmenides nor any other founder of classical Greek philosophy ever claims to have formed his concepts himself. None of them legitimates his concepts by presenting the way they were made. The abstractions underlying them are of a completely different kind. They are found given, ready-made, totally without derivation. They have occurred elsewhere, not by way of human thinking. In other words, these philosophers often had no idea what their concepts stood for, nor what had compelled them to imagine such things. The concepts are spoken about as if they were derived from a forgotten experience, or as if the philosophers were unconscious puppets of a force speaking through them. In fact, both ancient Indian and ancient Greek philosophy classifies the intellect as a sense. The notion that ideas were created rather than sensed was completely alien to these people. Anyway, these are exactly the kinds of signs we would expect to see if the cosmic projection theory of knowledge was true. More interestingly, a little later in the history of philosophy, philosophers begin to speculate about where their ideas come from. The most relevant comments for us come from Plato and Socrates. Plato, for example, argues that most men unwittingly divide up the conceptual and political world in which they live by a kind of division that is formally identical with money changing. Was not even Socratic dialectic, he wondered, pervaded by the monetary form of exchange? Was not dialectical division a kind of money changing, and dialectical hypothesizing a kind of hypothecation or mortgaging? It's only the existence of money, Socrates suggests, that allows us to imagine that words like power and interest refer to universal realities that can be pursued in their own right, let alone that all pursuits are really ultimately the pursuit of power, advantage, or self-interest. In these quotes, Socrates and Plato acknowledge the influence of money on Greek thought in the same way that, with the invention of the clock and the computer, lay people and scientists alike began projecting the mechanisms of clockwork and computation onto things, most notably the brain. Part 3. Alternative theories for the origin of philosophy. How about other theories on the origins of ancient Greek philosophy? Well, there is a small literature in the field of classics which is home to many of these theories. Among those factors considered are technological development, the invention of writing, the prevalence of public debate, democracy, the idea that greater leisure time allowed aristocrats to free their minds for thinking, and a combination of all of these factors. Nonetheless, Seaford systematically dismisses each of these for either reasons of timeline or exclusivity. Either these factors don't directly coincide with the invention of philosophy, or they're not exclusive to philosophy inventing societies. Part 4. What about philosophy in other parts of the world? Interestingly enough, the Greek intellectual revolution is not entirely unique. Around the same time, between 800 BCE and 200 BCE, both ancient India and ancient China underwent massive intellectual revolutions. Greek philosophy is therefore only a single instance of a world historical intellectual revolution, which Karl Jaspers calls the axial age. China, India, and the Mediterranean saw the emergence of remarkably parallel philosophical trends, from skepticism to idealism. In fact, almost the entire range of positions about the nature of the cosmos, mind, action, and the ends of human existence that have remained the stuff of philosophy to this day. As one of Jasper's disciples later put it, overstating only slightly, no really new ideas have been added since that time. That is why the history of philosophy since the axial age is said to be merely footnotes to Plato. The lifetimes of Pythagoras, Confucius, and the Buddha corresponds almost exactly to the period in which coinage was invented. What's more, the three parts of the world where coins were first invented were also the very parts of the world where those sages lived. In fact, they became the epicenters of axial age religious and philosophical creativity. Miletus was the first city in which coins were regularly used, and it was also the home of the first philosopher, Thales, and the birth of philosophy. Given the abruptness, independence, and near identity of these three intellectual revolutions, and given how sharply they break from everything which came before them, they surely cannot be explained by the usual laws of intellectual development. Part 5. What do I mean by money? Okay, let's talk about Greek money, because I'm sure many people will be wanting to point out that there have been many different currencies prior to ancient Greece, which were considered monetary or something of the sort. And they have many different functions. So what sets ancient Greek coins apart? Many things have been used as a medium of exchange leading up to the axial age, but none has satisfied the idea of money as a universal equivalent. In some cases, shells were used, but on closer inspection, these shells were confined to their own sphere of exchange, only being exchanged for one another. In another case, salt was used as a medium of exchange, but on closer inspection, while it was traded between communities, within communities it was valued for its natural uses, rather than its exchange value. A little while later, precious metals begin to be used as a medium of exchange. But at this point, they're still being used under the guise of their material value. At each transaction, they had to be weighed and cut, or melted and tested for their metallic purity. In short, they had to be treated in accordance with their physical nature. With the advent of coined money, the state guaranteed its acceptance and maintained its value even when the coin was damaged, restoring it free of charge. The intrinsic value of the metal was abstracted from. So ancient Greek money is different because the real substance of the money is not its physical manifestation, the coin, but this social substance, which is entirely immaterial. This abstraction from materiality is a process which we see progressively developed in paper and then digital money. So, in summary, money is the first physically manifest abstraction. It is the first object whose essence seems incorporeal, as it cannot be physically tracked down, and it is the first universal equivalent. Now it's time to dive into the philosophy. In his books, Seaford covers an impressive range of philosophy, but as this is merely an introductory video, I'm going to cover a few examples and save the rest for future videos. Part 6. Qualities of metaphysics. Non-appearing. Fundamental to philosophy is the belief in an invisible reality governing the visible one. Now, this needn't be superstitious. For example, reason, mathematics, universal laws, and Plato's theory of the forms. These are all examples of invisible realities which are more fundamental than the physical reality and which govern them in some sense. Nothing illustrates the appearance-reality distinction more clearly than a coin. To the Greeks, a coin appeared to be a small metal disc, but it was not treated in accordance with its physical nature. When a coin is replaced, the metal disappears, and yet its essence remains. The soul of the coin survives the death of its body. Additionally, the very concept of invisibility is found to have been invented in order to describe the immaterial quality of coins. The categories of invisible being and invisible wealth, inconceivable in Homer, are first found in the earliest texts to reveal the everyday working of coined money. Part 7. Qualities of metaphysics. Universality. It cannot be understated how unintuitive the idea that everything is one was for pre-axial age humans. Before the invention of coinage, ancient Indian cosmologies were exclusively polytheistic. In the first 9 books of the Rig Veda, there's not a single instance of monism. But, as we know, after that point, Indian philosophy is all about cosmic unity and everything being one. This abrupt transition from dualistic to monistic ontologies also plays out in ancient Greece. The first Greek philosophers were all convinced that beneath the illusory multiplicity of things in the world, there lay a single universal substance, which they called the arche. Democritus believed that everything was made of atoms. Thales believed that everything was made of water. Heraclitus believed that everything was made of fire. Pythagoras, all is number. What else could be responsible for this monistic revolution, other than something which, by its very nature, makes all things universally equivalent? Through money, all things are equalized and made one. That underlying universal substance, which the pre-Socratics sensed in all things, must have been abstract economic value. The truth of this is to be found in the ancient Greek words for things and being, ousia and chromata, which also both mean wealth. It is as if, with the advent of money, the whole of nature is now being conceived of in terms of wealth and economic value as well. Earlier humans may have looked at the whole of nature as a possible use value, that a tree could be chopped down and made into a house. But now humans were looking at the entirety of nature as a possible exchange value. What could this be worth? And no wonder. Money concentrates onto itself the desire for all that it can obtain, and therefore seems to subsume under itself everything for which it can be exchanged, whether that be material wealth, social prestige, or religious standing. So, for Seaford, money's universal exchangeability promoted a sense of sameness among things in general. The fact that anything could be transformed into something else via monetary exchange made the physical differences in things feel less real than the monetary value which underlay them. Part 8. Qualities of metaphysics. Impersonality. As mentioned earlier, the Greeks were the first to provide naturalistic and scientific explanations of reality. That is, to not depend on personal deities for their explanations, but use universal impersonal laws. Well, in the world of ideas, the laws of nature are the universal impersonal relations between all things. Whereas in human reality, money is that universal impersonal relation between all things. While a commodity is invested with the personality of its maker, money is bland and anonymous. Money exchange stands in the same relation to barter, credit, and gift-giving as the oral tradition stands in relation to the invention of writing. Both money and writing are technologies which make social interactions less personal, almost anonymous, but more efficient. This truth is intuitively graspable when we think about how empty it feels to give someone money as a gift, as opposed to something handmade. Just as the invention of online dating produced a huge shift in sexual psychology by facilitating hookup culture and impersonal sex, the invention of coinage added an impersonal wash to the intellectual psychology of the Greeks. It will interest you to know that Darwin actually derived the logic of natural selection from market dynamics, from the human world, and then projected that onto evolutionary history. In the same way, Seaford argues that the pre-Socratics derived the idea of an impersonal force of nature from their newly impersonal economy, and then projected that onto reality. Part 9. Uncovering projection. The question still remains, how have we been hoodwinked all this time into thinking that the Greeks overcame unconscious cosmic projection? The first person ever to have recognized thought as mere projection was Xenophanes, who said, "But if cattle and horses or lions had hands and could draw with their hands and produce works of art as men do, horses would draw their gods like horses and cattle like cattle, and each would then shape bodies in the likeness of their own." Seaford argues that Xenophanes' insight that men construct anthropomorphic gods in their own image was not because he has miraculously freed himself from all unconscious projection. What has changed is that impersonal, all-powerful substance, on its first appearance in history, has entered into his cosmic preconceptions, encouraging belief in impersonal deity. It is this new monetary projection that has distanced him from, enabling him to be conscious of, anthropomorphic projection. So, once humans can conceive of an impersonal force, projections of human personality become easier to detect. But as money is impersonal, it doesn't look like self-projection at all, and so its influence slips beneath our awareness. How does one thing produce opposing philosophies? Now, one question which might arise is, how are different philosophies possible if they're all caused by the same thing? Why does the world appear to Parmenides as a single unchanging eternal thing, whereas to Heraclitus it confronts him as the complete opposite, as constantly changing? Well, according to Seaford, Parmenides cosmizes the possession of money, and Heraclitus the circulation of money. Closing remarks. Philosophers like to think that myth is projection and metaphysics is not. But I think that we never really stopped projecting. Instead, we became aware of our old projections and unaware of our new projections, encouraging the idea that we had transcended unconscious cosmic projection. No doubt this opens up an entire universe of new questions and areas for further thinking. In future videos, I'll discuss the extent to which all thought is projection, especially modern philosophy as well. I'll also discuss whether we can universalize this idea into a general theory of cosmic projection. This video has only scratched the surface of this literature, so do expect more videos on this topic, on the philosophy of money, on the philosophy of philosophy, and on cosmic projection. Please let me know what you think in the comments, and please like and subscribe. Thank you very much.